Welcome back to episode 3 of Crow's Shiny Things. I'm really excited that we're on to episode 3. I'm actually doing this on a weekly basis. It feels good to be doing it. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it as well. Today I wanted to talk about a little bit of my plans for the next couple of episodes. I'm going to be judging a PQ this weekend, right? It's going to be the second weekend of ProQuest for Flesh and Blood, and a good buddy of mine and I will be going to judge that across town. And I'm going to try and blog a bit from the road and see if I can turn that into an actual episode. It'll be stretching things a little bit, but if you haven't figured it out, pretty much everything I'm doing here is kind of stretching where I'm at. I'm just jumping in and trying to make something work. And so I'm hoping every episode to kind of add a little something different, a little something more, so that over time we're getting better. These first ones, I'm fully aware they're not going to be fantastic because I'm learning as I go. But the goal is that eventually I keep getting better and we put something together that is quality over time. So stick with me, please, and have a little bit of patience. So today I have an idea for a series, and it's really kind of where I started when I was thinking about this channel, what I wanted to talk about and where I wanted to go with the channel. The first thing that I wanted to be talking about, of course, the entire casual aspect of the game, just where this game can be as a casual experience, how it can be played at the tabletop, and how it can really be enjoyed in that space without being hyper competitive, I think is underrated. Just this weekend, I was reading through Twitter. Fab's Twitter spaces are fantastic. If you haven't hooked up into Twitter with Fab, I know the rest of Twitter is burning down right now, but Fab Twitter is amazing. So whatever happens with Twitter, I'm really hoping that community sticks and goes somewhere else eventually together. There, in those conversations, were people who were really indicating that they don't see a whole lot there for casual play. And I would argue that's probably correct. There's not a lot that's available. There aren't a ton of resources that are aimed at the casual player. There's kind of a presumption of competition for most folks. And so that is priority number one for making this channel, was to combat that presupposition that everybody who plays the game wants to get good so they can go to their local armory and just wreck things, or go to a PQ and take home a PTI. And those are great goals. They're just not my goals. Along with that is an eagerness, a real excitement for the coming PvE expansions. We have no idea when these things are going to come out. Like, we just don't know. James White has said that they will be out somewhere soon, right? Is that 2023? I don't know. If it is 2023, frankly, I don't think it's going to be until the end of 2023. I think it's more likely that it's early 2024. But even that's a gamble. The reason I say that is because clearly their priority is on the steady and regular pace of releases for the other sets. And I think that's correct. I think that's where they need to have their focus. So this isn't a goad to LSS to try and speed that up, really. I would rather they take their time, do it right, and really succeed in this space, because Well, the space around it is littered with other games that have not gotten their due, and I want LSS to really knock this out of the park. I think that the player base deserves it. I think there's a group here that would just devour this sort of an expansion into a PvE environment. And so that's one of the things that I want to focus on this year is looking at the game as it may lead into PvE. To start that off, I have in mind to do a series that is going to be, well, I want to look at other games that are similar to Flesh and Blood in some mechanical fashion that do a PvP experience and talk about what we might learn from those PvE experiences, dissect them a little bit, and think about what that might entail for Flesh and Blood. So that when Flesh and Blood's PvE experience really gets here, we have kind of a wealth of things to go back to and look at that might help inform our understanding of how the game is going to be played and how it fits together. And if nothing else, these should be interesting side looks at other games that are worth our time in the casual space, because I don't know any casual players who play just one game. We all play several. And so there's going to be a lot of games that I want to look at, and I've got several of them right here. There's a couple of these that are nearly identical in kind of not format. I don't want to say identical to Fab because there isn't really anything that's identical to Fab. But if we're talking about card-based games that are giving you a deck of cards that you play a character and you then try and conquer a villain, a PvE experience of some sort, there are a couple of games that are similar to that. Starting with this monster, Marvel Champions. It's a fantastic little game. I've played a lot of this with a group of friends, and it's really fun. But it has some very good similarities to Flesh and Blood that makes it an ideal one to look at and think about the mechanics of it and how it might inform our idea of what's coming for Flesh and Blood. There is the granddaddy of these style of games, which is this one, Arkham Horror. This is the old school card game Arkham Horror, which you build decks of a hero, you go and fight against entities that are unknown and unknowable, and usually lose quite a bit. There's some great things to think about in those. Champions, for instance, uses a similar mechanic for resources, where your cards are paid as resources. How might that collide with the idea of a villain encounter? Arkham Horror has a lot of great things to think about in terms of a campaign setting, where you get points to expand your deck. Granted, I'll be honest, I don't use those rules because it annoys me. I want to play the cards I want to play, but I'm well aware of them and I know how they work. So we'll talk about that. In an almost direct corollary, a lot of people loved Legend of the Five Rings, right? And then this little expansion came out at the very end of the lifespan of FFG's Legend of the Five Rings. This was a beautiful game, like just gorgeous, that I thought I was going to love probably more than I did. In the end, it ended up being a very complex game where the complexity was not entirely rewarded at the moment of play. And that meant that often choices were sort of not that rewarding to you. Anyway, they released this expansion, which is their player versus environment expansion. And I'm going to dig it out, take a look at it, and see if there's anything that's interesting to be gleaned from the playing of it today, now that it's been canceled for a couple years. Yeah, a couple of years now. Those games are fairly similar. Oh, here's the other one. Ashes Reborn. Many thanks to the guys at Team Covenant for helping to make this a thing, and to Plaid Hat for having this game continue to come out. This is a fantastic little deck building game where you have a hero that you put together and battle head to head, just like Flesh and Blood, L5R, etc. They are coming out with a new expansion that is PvE. It's already been played online by the Team Covenant guys. Zach and Steven have done that. I'm on the list to get this. It hasn't released yet, or at least hasn't shown up in my inbox or my mailbox yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So when it comes out, this is one of the ones I want to play a few games of and pick apart, because the experience might be helpful to see what could happen with Flesh and Blood. So those are things that are very similar in the idea of how they play. They are effectively PvP games, head-to-head hero fighting games, especially L5R and Ashes in particular, that then expanded into a PvE arena. And so I want to look at how the PvE expansion went. Marvel Champions and Arkham Horror don't have PvP as a portion of their game, but you're still building a deck and going out and adventuring, and I think there's a lot to be learned from that. There's also a couple of other games that I think are interesting analogs because they have taken an idea that may help to shed some light on how we think about PvE coming into Flesh and Blood. One of those is Keyforge. Keyforge really has done a very similar thing. Again, I should have mentioned it in the same breath with Ashes and L5R, actually. Keyforge is head-to-head. Brought in its PvE expansion, the Keyraken expansion. I've played it as well. It was really fun. A good expansion. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with their relaunch this year. I think it's going to be really exciting to see that relaunch. And so we'll take a look at that as well. Alongside that, there are some odd ones. So one of those is Sentinels of the Multiverse, which is self-contained game where, again, you make a hero, you are playing a superhero, and you fight against villains with a deck of cards. There's going to be some similarities come up in these games, and I think Sentinels is a great one to look at for some of the core mechanics that have been around in this game space for a long time that work, and that I think we're going to see in Flesh and Blood. We will see what they do, right? We can't say for sure. Mainly because James won't give us any concrete details. In addition to Sentinels, there's this, which is Dice Throne. This is a weird one. You may not think that this has anything to do with Flesh and Blood. And the core game mechanic of it, you're correct. It really doesn't. You're playing combat Yahtzee, right? Combat. People always laugh when I say that, but it's combat Yahtzee. You're rolling dice and then matching them with different patterns to do things for your hero. This is the Cursed Pirate set. Ooh, Cursed Pirate. It's super fun. This is a great game. Highly recommend it, especially if you've got younger kids a little younger that can play Flesh and Blood reliably. It's an easy game to do, but it's a lot of fun. Moves fast. They recently came out though with a PvE expansion that is a dungeon crawl for Dice Throne, which is at its core a head-to-head combat-based game. So it's interesting because they have tacked on an adventure, a dungeon crawl adventure style game into Dice Throne, and it works really well. I don't think we're going to see quite this with it, but in some ways it's kind of similar to like Arkham Horror in how it deals with some things, and mainly with maps, stuff like that. But it provides some really interesting details. And then lastly, at least on my list for the moment, there's this beautiful game, which has a lot of options. Oh, I should look at the players first. And I don't think a lot of people know this game, but this is Thornwatch. These are character cards for Thornwatch. This was put out by the guys at Penny Arcade a couple of years ago. It's really an interesting game that they developed in-house. And again, you play a hero. These are the said heroes, right? They always have a female side and a male side, but they're the same character. It's just the art's different, which I kind of liked. These then were the basis for a deck of cards you would put together, and you would play a game through on a map, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons. But it did some interesting things with manipulation of decks and cards to do things like initiative that, well, I don't think they're going to have a direct input on Flesh and Blood in any way, shape, or form. I think they could be interesting to think about, because no matter where this goes, yeah, I think there's going to be some fun things to play around with in it. And so stuff like that, which is a little bit off the wall, I think still has something to offer to us. And so I want to take a look at those games and think about them as they might coincide with something from Flesh and Blood. So clearly that's quite a few games, right? And that's not even taking all of them into account. Like, I haven't really looked at any of RPGs, and I think that some things like A Quiet Year, or there's one or two post-apocalyptic games, After the Fall? No, I can't remember. But there's one or two RPGs that I think are going to be interesting to pay attention to in terms of what they could tell us about like map making and how those things are done in a narrative fashion. And then we'll see if that has any bearing on the campaign play that Flesh and Blood has alluded to. So my plan is to start looking into these games and pick them apart a little bit and present each one, or maybe two at a time, together, and look at what we can learn from them. We may first get a bit of that video blog from the ProQuest next week, and then I will dive into these games and I start talking about this stuff. I really can't wait for the Red Rains expansion to get here for Ashes. Very excited about that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I want to play it with some friends. So hopefully we'll have a lot to go on to build into. And remember, I'm not looking at these games because I think that like I'm trying to sell you on these games. This is not my point. I'm specifically wanting to look at them in terms of Flesh and Blood, and where I think Flesh and Blood can really succeed, and where I think maybe it might have some pitfalls to look out for. So, all that said, well, I hope you have a good week of gaming. Try and get in a game of Flesh and Blood, and have a great time at your tables. Thanks.